Hungry Trilobyte podcast would like to start by acknowledging SoonerCon. The longest running pop culture con in Oklahoma has a new look, a new mascot, and a fantastic guest list. Join us in Norman, Oklahoma, June 30th through July 2nd, 2023, and meet celebrities such as Billy West, John Scalzi, Erica Harlicker, and John Swasey. Visit SoonerCon.com to reserve your membership.
On tap today, we have Mike Dolce. How you doing this fine day?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you here. I love comics, and you are a comic creator, bar none. I love your work. And you've got a new work coming out that you're marking as being a tribute to, well, pushing it as a tribute to 90s comics.
Yeah, it's actually a comic book that's well, it's been near and dear to my heart, first of all, and second of all, it's actually been around for a while, but now Dren Productions is picking it up and putting it out, and we're actually re-releasing the first 3 issues as a trade, which has never been done before. It's called the SIRE Origins, SIRE, and yeah, it is. If you enjoyed 90s style comic books, superhero books, Marvel, DC, and we're talking about like early 90s, even like late 80s, that kind of stuff. This is definitely a book for you. This is definitely, the kind of series that you are, you're going to enjoy. It's about a superhero forced by his own costume to fight evil. It's kind of like having a spider sense, but instead of warning him of danger, actually puts him in danger. And he doesn't know how he got the costume, doesn't know why it's making him do what it does, and worst of all is he can't take it off. He's trapped inside.
And so we've had a lot of heroes that get their abilities from their costume in one way or another. But in
Yep.
this case, he's actually being compelled by the costume itself. Is the costume sentient, or is that a spoiler?
It's not a spoiler, but yeah, it's part of the mystery he's got to unravel. So
Fair.
through the course of this issue of this trade in particular, he is kind of just trying to really hold on for dear life because everything's kind of happening really fast. These supervillains are actually being drawn to him as well, and that's something that's not accidental. And it was kind of my answer to the question of like, if I'd really, if let's say you got superpowers or super suit or whatever the case is, would you really go out and patrol? Would you really go out and actually do all this stuff? And my answer would be no. I'd go on TV or in these days, I'd go on social media and start posting stuff immediately, right? And try to make a lot of money or try to be famous. And in this case, the costume and the powers themselves that all these heroes and villains, kind of possess are kind of forcing them into the superhero universe that we grew up kind of enjoying, and so now they're kind of acting out the part, and they don't know why. So that is the central mystery to it. And so what the suit is exactly, what it's connected to, there is an alien energy force that has kind of hit Earth at the same time. So we'll leave it at that and see how it goes.
Fair enough. I'm not in the business of giving spoilers, so I'm happy to leave it there. I do have to say, though, I'm curious that you put so much love and affection toward 90s comics because I'm a huge fan of 90s comics. That's the era I grew up in.
Same
But
here.
talking with everybody else, it seems like it's very popular to rag on that particular style of comic. And is that your experience?
You know what? I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm old and all my circle has traveled with me, but that's what we all grew up on. So
Mhm.
if it's new comic book readers, I don't know. I think they would get a kick out of it. I feel like everything '90s is new now, even though that's kind of scary for me because I grew up in the '90s. So everyone's wearing Nirvana T-shirts, and I was in a bar once and recently, and this girl had to be maybe 21, 22 years old, and she goes to the jukebox and like it's Alice in Chains, it's Pearl Jam, it's Green Day, and it's like I'm like, oh, you like this? She's, oh, I love the '90s stuff, and the early '90s was such an era of creativity in music and comic books, in television and movies that you know I don't know. You know what? If people are down on it, it's not been my experience. And if people are down on that era of superhero, I don't know. I think people my age, your age, around this, and I would even say within the last, a 10-year, back window, people going into their late 20s, early 30s, they're fascinated by the '90s. If I feel like this is the time, if anything. I think people were upset with maybe like the big boobs and stuff like that, but it hasn't really changed. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't see any difference now than 30 years ago with that. I don't know. I grew up on the Claremont stuff. I grew up on, David Michelini's run on Amazing Spider-Man, and Gary Conway's run on Amazing Spider-Man, and on Fabian Nicieza, who I've gotten, to become friends with, through my course of being within the industry. And, I don't know. It was a great time to read comic books. I mean, there was no better time. I mean, the art was jumping off the page. And that's what we definitely, with Dan Leister on the book, tried to replicate with Talon Caldwell on covers. I don't know. I feel like it was not my experience, and if it is, so be it. I don't think any of those people ragging on it. I feel like they're not the ones buying comic books these days anyway in the comic book stores.
Well, I thank you. I would agree completely that your art nails that particular style, because that is something that, as somebody who still goes to the comic store and buys comics,
Yeah,
I don't often see that style that I'm looking for. I see styles I like. I'm not down
yeah,
on what's out there, but I do miss that. There's a, well, I'm not an artist, so I don't have the terms to describe what I would like to
sure.
see. But there's a much more basic use of color, not nearly as much shading as we've grown accustomed to. The texturing not nearly there, but the image and impression you get from it is unmistakable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's, I mean, look, I can still remember when you get those 3-pack of X-Men comics in like a Toys R Us.
Mhm.
Like buying stuff. What's Toys R Us, right? Buying this kind of stuff. And I just remember seeing Uncanny X-Men 280. Just always stands out in my mind. That Jim Lee cover, Cyclops is holding Professor Xavier, and he's shooting, his optic blast into the sky. Xavier's all cut up in the anguish, and it's like, man, I was 10 years old, and it was just like, holy cow, this is like, it just jumped out at me. It was unreal. X-Force #1, seeing that, I'd never bought an X-Men book before X-Force #1. I just saw the cover with Cable on it, and I was like, man, I gotta check this out, it was just a great time to be, a kid, and it was a great time to be into comic books.
And one of the things that gets dipped on a lot are the quintessential hollow foil covers. That was all the rage for a couple of years. It
Yeah.
became a cliche, and I bought a few of them like anybody else. I'm not going to say I didn't, but the fact is they existed because people were buying enough and they were enjoying them enough. Somebody wanted to raise the bar. That's not a bad thing.
Wait, so what's really funny though, and what's amazing about it, right? So you circle now to 30 years later, and Kickstarter is just the #2 producer of comic books, period, right? Or the #2 revenue. I might even be #1. I mean, at this point, right? How many comics have been kickstarted? Um, and that's the stuff that gets your Kickstarter over the top, is the hollow foil covers, the special covers, the variant covers, and things like that. So old is new, my man. Everything is everything kind of goes around in a cycle, and it's right back to where it was. It's just on a Kickstarter scale now.
There's no such thing as a bad idea. It just might not be the right time.
Yeah,
You're trying
yeah,
to sell a hollow foil cover in 1993. You're going to have a good time. In
yeah.
2003, not so much.
I really think about that too. If I was if it, it's funny. I was a kid during a good time, but if I was a creator in, let's say, 1990, and just put out my own superhero book, I'd be
Mhm,
rich. Like, I would
mhm.
literally have made $1 million. Like, that's how insane that time was. I mean, I remember going to like my drugstore, and I'm not talking about like finding stuff on the racks, because we had stuff on the racks. First of all, stuff was on the racks everywhere, which I miss. I miss that as being a kid. I guess you don't need that now, because you can just go and click an app now and you get everything. But I miss going into like stationery stores. That's where I picked up my first comic book, was a stationery store. But in my local drugstore, they had a wall of comic books, and it wasn't. It was stuff that was like priced at like hundreds of dollars. Like all the Valiant stuff was up there. The X-Men stuff was up there. The Spider-Man stuff, the McFarlane Spider-Man, run was up there. This is a drugstore. It's not a comic book store. That's how crazed everything was in the marketplace. And I remember being a kid, looking up at some of these things, or going to my local comic book store and seeing, the high price stuff on the wall. And thinking like, oh man, one day I wanna own some of these books that I missed out. I was a little too late for the Rob Liefeld run. I came in at X-Force #1, so his New Mutant stuff I couldn't get. The irony is, I went on Amazon like during COVID, because during COVID we're like looking for stuff to do. I completed my entire New Mutants collection, for like 20-30 bucks at that point. So it's just kind of funny, with the exception of Deadpool's first appearance, and Cable's first appearance, but everything else in between, stuff that used to go for 50, 60, 70 bucks, back in 1991, which that's a big deal back then. I was able to collect it, but that's what the industry was, man. It was a crazy time. I'd be a millionaire right now if I was a creator back then, but I'd be super, super old now. So,
Well, hey, but you have a whole lot ahead of you now too. I mean, you got this project that you're pushing now. What kind of legs do you think it has? Is this something that you can do for 6 to 10 issues, or is this something that could be an ongoing run for years and years?
Oh, well, see, that's the cool part about it. So we released. I actually was published under. The company was actually called Aftershock, but it wasn't the Aftershock that we knew. It was a division of After Hours Press, and so we put 6 issues out back in 2006 to 2008, and we did 2 miniseries, SIRE and SIRE Revelations. Both will be in Diamond. SIRE Origins is the first 3 issues. SIRE Revelations will be out in September. Will be out in September. It'll be in the. I'm trying to think of like the July previews. And then I ended up going on to doing books at Image Comics. I colored a book called M Theory, and that got me connected to Jim Valentino. And then I pitched him a book called Descendant. Came out in 2009, so I co-created that with my friend Marcus Perry. I was the co-writer, the co-creator, and the colorist on that as well. And then around like 2012 or so, I was looking for the next thing, and people, I would go to the conventions and I'd be selling stuff that I was doing. I did some stuff for Zenescope in between there as well too. And people kept asking, like, when's the next issue of SIRE coming out? And I said, I left it after issue 6 to where you get a beginning, middle, and end, but there's so much more. There's so much more to the story. And I was like, you know what? I might as well pick it back up again. I put out an issue 7, and that's when I started dabbling in Kickstarter. So around like 2014, 2015, we started putting out issue 7. We put out issue 8. We put out, I think issue 9 was the first one we actually kickstarted. We did an issue 7 and issue 8. And I kind of drew some of it at that point. And I also had another artist kind of working with me, kind of just piecemeal, where I could afford it here and there. But then we started moving on to Kickstarter, and now, we just finished up the volume 3 trade on Kickstarter. So this thing already, goes till issue 13 for sure. And it'll be released as trades in the stores though. I don't know what I'm going to do with the single issues. I think the single issues are going to be kickstarted, and then we're going to release the trades in Diamond. When I say I don't know, like we don't know, it's really just, it's all up to me and what I decide. At this point, I'm definitely just doing trades for the stuff that's already been released in Diamond, because I don't need to go back and do that. And I think it's going to be kickstarted single issues, digital single issues, and we'll retail the trades, in the stores and stuff like that. As far as how long it can go, so I created this character in 6th grade. I think I did what everyone does at that age. They take a piece of paper, they fold them together, they staple them, and they make issues. And between 6th to 8th grade, I made like 30 issues of that comic.
Wow.
And around like 32, it was funny. It was like around issue, I forget which number exactly. I think it might even be 38. I'm in high school at this point, and I'm starting to get a little more mature, a little more, I'm into all these different things like Sin City and the Scott McDaniel run on Daredevil with DJ Chichester. And, I read Watchmen for the first time, and, so it's like, my maturity level kind of hit a point where I'm like, I need to kind of do something better. Cause really it just was criminals broke into his house. He found a suit, and he, in his attic, and he went out and he started fighting crime. Like that was originally like the whole plot. That's what you do when you're 10 years old. You're
right.
You're not really thinking what it is. And so I started creating this massive backstory around, the costume and his powers and all this other stuff that was going on. And around issue 50, and I just kept doing them through high school. It was actually around issue 60 where I'm like, man, I was telling him, I used to make them, and I just passed around the one issue to like my little circle of friends to read, and they would read them and give them back to me. And, I'd say, hey, what do you think? And they're like, yeah, I think this is really cool. And I said, yeah, I think there's a story here. And leaving high school, like I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to make comics. Like that was it. Like, that's all I ever wanted to do. And I wanted to tell this story. And so I kept making them through college. I have 100 issues. It's a beginning, middle, and end. And so what I'm targeting to do is around, if I in my head, I feel like I can sync up issues 25 of the SIRE with issue 60 of my original little book. And then from then on, I actually reread all my I reread everything a couple years ago because I was getting ready for this new trade, and issue 61 to 100, like I can almost translate verbatim. Like I actually read it, I go, this is really good. Like as if I didn't write them. I honestly, I was reading them as a fan. I wrote them 20 years ago, and I'm like, man, this is actually. So you know, to answer your question in the longest way possible, this thing can definitely keep going. And it's an epic superhero story. And the one thing I'm starting to realize is I have to get on this because I'm finding, you know, bits and pieces of things I wanted to do are getting told through other stories. You know, like Moon Knight comes to example. People are like, "Oh, it's like Moon Knight," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's like Moon Knight, except I came out with mine 15 years ago." Yeah, it's got certain, you know, it's got a piece of that. Yeah, all right, I gotta. Oh, yep, Blue Beetle now. You know, that came out after what I did, and you know what they're doing with Venom now. And it's like, all right, I gotta get this story out there because if I don't, someone's gonna beat me to it at this point.
And I'm going to look at this, and I had a very similar conversation over dinner with another creator not too long ago, and I really want to get your opinion on this. And I'm not sure
Mhm.
there's a right or wrong answer, but when you're looking at these kinds of Kickstarters, you have to ask these questions. Like,
Sure.
as as a reader, the trade paperbacks are amazing because you can just throw it
Yeah.
in there. You don't feel too bad if it gets a little dinged up. It's really handy to pack all those stories into one volume.
Yeah.
As a collector, I have this compulsion to want all those individual issues in their
Yep.
bags with their boards in the box. And is there really a reason to have those individual issues in this day and age besides that emotional need for me to have those comics?
Um. Well, I mean, I'll tell you one thing. If you're talking to a retailer, they will tell you that's their lifeblood.
Okay,
Those
that's a good
single
reason.
issues actually keep them in business because they wouldn't they really wouldn't make the kind of money that they would make on a month to month basis. You know, cash flow to keep them going. Trades tend to just kind of, you know, are icing on the cake, and they're icing on the cake for creators too. Ironically enough, in terms of like money, I remember good friend of mine, Ryan Bodenheim, rest in peace. He you know, he's an artist at Marvel, but he was also doing stuff with Hickman at Image, and he was telling me, he's like, yeah, you know, you kind of float from issue to issue, but then once the trade comes in, you know, you're getting paid for work you already did, and that's where you, as an artist, you actually made your money. You know, I mean, he got paid for his individual issues too, but you know, again, the ability to make what's called passive income, you know, is kind of huge. I think also on the Kickstarter end of things, it's huge. It's huge for us creators as well too, because so I actually did the last Sire Kickstarter as a trade, which I goof for two reasons. One, I wanted to draw the whole thing myself. It was COVID, so I was like, yeah, I'm feeling ambitious and I can do this. But as it turned out, I could not. So I ended up having to hire artists. So I ended up all said and done, I probably lost money on that. Which again, it's a labor of love. It's a passion. I'm not like upset about that. But going forward, I'm like, no. Like, and publisher of Dren, James Mossy, and I were like, you know, he's a good friend of mine from college too. He's like, no, we do the single issues. We do the single issues on Kickstarter, and then we do the trade. You know, the single issues fuel the trade. And so there is a motivating factor for that. Plus, you know, we sell them digitally on the website as well too. And you know, that's again, that's just more passive income. I think it's just it's a way to do it and to make comics in a way that's both palatable on both ends, right? So as the reader, you know, you get that monthly fix, because otherwise it's you know, it's 3 months in between each trade if you're lucky, you know. So there is some need for it. I think there is a need for it. I don't disagree with you though when it comes to like bookstores and things like that. You know, at the end of the day, people are just going to go there and they're just going to pick it up. But don't forget the digital aspect to it. I think, you know, again, putting stuff out on a regular basis, you know, that can't be taken for granted.
There was a time I was really into the purist aspect of I want the original comic, the first print, and then there's still a lot of that in me. But I've
Mm-hmm.
come to appreciate so much how the new readers are helped by having all the options, and the industry is helped by having all the options, and the
Yeah.
creators are helped by having all the options. I want all those voices at the table.
Yeah. No, I agree. And you know, honestly, that's how what's kind of nice about today, right? I mean, you have it's an a la carte menu at this point. You know, if you want to collect the single issues, I got people that come up to me and they're like, I will only buy the single issues, just like you. They're like, I don't want to touch a trade. I want the floppies. That's what I want, and that's what they order. I gave that as an option, and I had a few people actually back that reward for just the floppies. So it's kind of neat. I mean, I like I like the floppies. I will confess though, um, for storage purposes and for also just reading a full complete story, I've also personally kind of gone toward the trades more. But I got to be honest, I still have a pull list. I still put, I still pick up Spider-Man and some of the couple X books here and there, and Saga and things like that. And I still appreciate the floppies too. I don't know. I don't think that'll ever go away. Maybe the next generation, won't have the same kind of relationship that we have with it.
Yeah, and that's where we come back to the idea of having the comics in the drugstore and on the rack, because that
Ugh.
when that is the case, when that's your introduction to them, when that's what you're looking for, and the trades are not even on your radar, that's going to be what you go back to. And if our generation that we're seeing now isn't looking for that, I don't know where that leads.
Yeah. What was your first comic you picked up, and where did you pick it up?
I don't know, but I would almost guess, based on what I remember from that time in my life, it was probably at the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, it was probably at Lanco, and it would have been on a spinner rack, most
Yeah.
likely near the greeting card aisle.
Yeah.
I probably would have gotten something like Heathcliff or Alf, because those are
Okay.
my oldest and most beat up comics. So I'm guessing one of those was first.
Yeah. Oh, that's it's funny you mentioned that actually, because now I'm thinking to myself, you're actually going to change my longtime answer of what was my first comic. The first comic book that I remember, I do remember picking up some Archies, but the digests, at
Mhm.
the supermarket, because they're right on the stand there. So technically, I guess that would technically be my first comic book. But my first like real floppy experience though was like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Archie series, #5. I was huge into that cartoon show. I mean,
Mhm.
I absolutely loved it. It had the Man Ray on it. I actually just read all those old Archie comics to my son. He loved it, so that was kind of cool. Um, but I remember that. But that was at a stationery store, and then I remember on Sunday mornings, we go to church. It was like 8:30 church, and then we go to Grand Union afterwards. And there was the magazine rack, and the magazine rack just had tons of Marvel and DC comic books, and that was like my incentive. Like, yeah, I want to go to the grocery store with you, and then I would just hang out at the magazine rack, and I'd pick up one or two comics and bring them home, and it was cool. Like it'll never happen again. We have too much technology now. So I mean and again, you can't miss something you never had. So I don't think the new generation is going to miss anything, because they don't know what they're missing. But we can look back and go, man, that was a great time to be a kid.
And I specifically remember I was not really into Archie floppies.
Mm-hmm.
I never picked one up. I inherited a few and read them, but the Archie Digest were
Yeah.
fantastic road trip material. I would always grab one of those big fatties for a road trip that would last 6, 7, 8 hours, because that
Yep.
would get me through the whole trip.
Yep.
And that was my sole use for them. They were a value proposition.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you. Yeah, that's true too. And what we used to do too? We used to go to the library, and we used to take out, like, I mean, they had a lot of the old, like, Stanley, Jack Kirby, Stanley, Steve Ditko, comics, all like in like these collectors. They weren't graphic novels though. They were like the history of comics or whatever. And I
Mhm.
used to get I remember actually having my mom like photocopy some of the pages, and I got Captain America #1 like somehow out of like a comic book history book. It was yeah, it was just anywhere we could get it. I mean, that's kind of the beauty. Like, I feel like this with Netflix right now, or any of the streaming services, right? Like, you give me everything, I want to watch nothing. You make things, very rare, or harder to get, and it becomes like just more of a prize to get. And back then, to get your comic book fix, it was go to the comic book store every, I guess back then it was Tuesday, but for me it was like Wednesday or Thursday. I'd be there, and the new books would be there, and that was a huge thing. But anywhere, like, give me a Grand Union, a stationery store, a library, anything, anywhere I can get my hands on it. It was drive me around, Dad, and find find me a place for it.
I will confess something, that what you just said about, if you give me everything, I want nothing, is a huge part of why this podcast exists. Because as somebody who loves this stuff and has always loved this stuff, I realize between the apps on my phone and a quick trip to Amazon, I can get anything I
Yep.
want, and that paralyzes me. But doing this show gives me the chance to reach out to the creators that I know are there, making the
Yeah,
stuff that I know I'd like if I just knew it existed and it gets put in
exactly.
my lap.
No, and you know what? There's something to be said about that. I mean, there's something about, the couriers of good things to listen to. I mean, that was something about listening to the radio that was great too, because you could listen and discover a new band or discover a new song. Now again, I mean, it's amazing. You have, as a comic book creator or musician, an artist, you have like a million ways to get your stuff out there, and that's awesome. But you also are now competing with a million other, people out there, and that's something I'm actually eternally grateful that I was at least able to get SIRE out, in the 2000s first, in order to kind of establish the identity of the brand, of the character. Because I got, it's kind of cool. I've got folks that came up to me just as recently as C2E2, and they're like, "Man, I bought this when I was 12." And I'm like, "That's awesome," and you're in your 20s now, so that's kind of cool. Like, um, that people still remember it, and it gives me a little bit of an edge over everyone else out there who's kind of, and obviously, look, I have a decent resume as well too, so that's a good thing. But but that being said, yeah, it just helps. It just helps that it's kind of been out there already, because otherwise it's just a sea of everything. And yeah, like I said, I will read nothing if that happens.
And as much as I am thankful for all the things we do have and all the options we do have, I want to make sure people see stuff like your work there. So I'm going to put everything that you have on the show notes on my website,
Oh, please do. Thank you.
aaronbossig.com. Want that to be a highway straight to your stuff. Michael, where can people follow your adventures on the web?
Oh yeah, plenty of places. I'm active on all the social media. You can go, Facebook, it's at Sire Studios. That's one word. Twitter is Sire_Studios, because somebody got that name in 2009 and has never tweeted out since then, but will not give it up. So I can't seem to get that one back. Instagram, Sire Studios. YouTube, at Sire Studios. You can get all my stuff at SireStudiosInc.com. That's SireStudiosInc.com. And then Dren Productions. Go check out what Dren's going on. I have another book with Dren as well too, called Epicenter. And that we just kickstarted the first issue a little while ago. We're going to kickstart the rest of the series through them as well too. And Plan 59 number 1 through 3 is in stores now. Actually, well, no, issue 1 just hit stores. Number 2 is hitting in a couple weeks, and issue 3 should be there in a couple weeks as well too. So check it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michael. I'd be glad to have you back anytime.
Anytime. Thank you so much.